you can't be an outrageous lover, right, without doing sense making. And sense making means integrating, synergizing, opposing, deeply felt, intelligently, madly loving, articulated perspectives, synergizing them into a larger whole. Where are we? We're in one mountain, many paths. We're in an evolutionary synagogue. We're in an evolutionary secular humanist center. We're in an evolutionary church. We're in an evolutionary mosque. We're in an evolutionary zendo. We're in an evolutionary ethical cultural center. We're in an evolutionary Taoist center. And we're in an evolutionary space in which there's no center, in which everyone is, right, in the stuff and space of their lives and haven't found their way, right, to any kind of communion in this generation. So we're gathering everyone, right? We're gathering everyone. We are everyone gathering everyone. We are the vision of a new universal grammar of value, which becomes a context for our diversity. We're the vision of a potential world religion that is the music, the underlying musical score that desperately needs and makes spacious room for and is animated by all of the unique instruments, the unique religions, the unique systems. We are the evolution of religion. We are the evolution of love, because the evolution of love is also the evolution of religion. Because what's religion? Religion is the story of reality's interiors, right? There's the exterior story of evolution. And then for many thousands of years, the interior story, the inside story of evolution was the evolution of interiors. And the evolution of interiors expressed itself as the evolution of religion. And even the abandonment of religion for quite good reasons, because religion overreached and made mistakes and became cruel in many ways. But the abandonment of religion is itself part of the evolution of interiors. Religion stands to the side. Universal human rights appear. Democracy appears. New ways of gathering information appear. New ways of relating to each other appear, the emergence of the feminine, the claiming of embodiment. All sorts of things happen, but these are part of, in essence, reality reaching for a new religion, reality becoming heretical. Reality says, I'm a heretic. I deny the overreaches of the old religion because they're expressions of a small comprehension of reality. They're expressions of a contracted understanding of reality. And they're actually no longer expressions of Eros, of reality as the progressive deepening of intimacies. Religion has become regressive and fundamentalist in a way that it's no longer intimate with reality or with the human body or with itself or with the sense of the universal family of life and of humanity. So in all these ways, right, in all these ways, can we hear that? In all of these ways, religion, and then followed by religion, the emergence of various forms of humanism, right, become the evolution of interiors. So reality is not merely a fact, it's a story. It's not an ordinary story, it's an evolutionary story. And that evolutionary story is the evolution of exterior structures, techno-economic bases, socio-structural bases, governance bases, and those are all at the human level, but it's exteriors all the way up and all the way down. And then there's the evolution of interiors. So evolution is the story of evolution, the progressive evolution of the outsides and the insides, okay? And at this moment in human history, our story of the evolution of the inside has ground to a halt. We've made almost no progress for 250, 300 years in our inside evolution. while our outside evolution has gone ballistic, has ramped up, exponentiated beyond imagination, and in many ways bringing great blessing, the great dignities of modernity, but in many ways ushering in the structural seeds of existential risk to our very existence, of catastrophic risk. Imagine, right, a famine in India in which 200 million people could be killed in a week because we haven't actually engaged the climate and haven't created the necessary protections. Catastrophic risk, rogue nuclear devices, weaponized drones, methane gas under the tundra, right? We've actually, right, developed a linear materials economy whose very structure is exponential growth, which has to fall off a cliff, right? Whose very structure is potentially self-terminating. And that self-termination, that existential risk is rooted in the utter halt, the utter stoppage, the utter blockage, right? The utter cessation, the utter atrophying of the evolutionary process of interiors, which is the evolution of love, which is the evolution of Eros, which is the evolution of intimacy. Wow. And what we're saying here at One Mountain, Many Paths, which is the heart of the revolution, is that it's our responsibility. It's the overwhelming, celebratory, joyous, urgent, ecstatically urgent, filled with trembling, and yet privileged responsibility to actually address this meta-crisis. And we address this meta-crisis by actually jump-starting again the evolution of interiors, the evolution of the inside. And the inside, the interior at its core, the interior core of reality is a story, is a narrative. And it's a story about love. It's a story about intimacy. It's a story about the evolution of intimacy. It's a story about the progressive deepening of intimacies. I spoke yesterday with someone I don't talk to often. We talk every, X amount of time, Perry Marshall, who's a wonderful man. He's a brilliant, business player, but actually his true greatness lies, I think, in his work in science. Right? He published an important article on biology transcends computation and another two very, very important essays. And he's done incredibly important work on reversing cancer research, on relationship between evolution and cancer, and really convened together with James Shapiro and Dennis Noble, right, a community of heterodox evolutionary thinkers. And we've been in touch over the last several years, kind of exchanging, kind of part of the invisible college, right, exchanging and sharing, and we're writing in different languages. And I was sharing with him this notion. It was just beautiful to hear his holding of it, this notion of reality as the progressive deepening of intimacies. He said, well, that's Marc Gafni language, but what he meant was, yes, that's exactly right. He said, I'm writing in a different idiom, and he's writing in particular kind of scientific peer-reviewed important articles, but he understood very clearly exactly what I meant, and we're writing in the idiom of the new sciences, which merge interior and exterior science together. So evolution really is the progressive deepening of intimacies. That's really what it's about. And at the core, the progressive deepening of intimacies is the evolution of story. It's a new story we tell about ourselves. So what we want to do today is we want to evolve the story of what it means to be a human being, with the understanding that only by evolving that story can we respond to the meta-crisis. Does that make sense, everyone? That's what we're about today. That's what we're going to be engaged in. And particularly, I want to respond to, not directly, I don't think it needs direct response. I got to both read and listen to a beautiful presentation made by one of my close associates, and who's deeply partnering with us here at the Center for World Philosophy and Religion, Dr. Elena, right, who spoke 2 weeks ago about the Ukraine and gave what I thought was a very, very important talk, right, challenging correctly, right, what happens to our attention span? How do we lose attention? We begin with our attention completely focused on the Ukraine, and then we're not quite sure how to keep our attention there. And I'm not going to enter into the labyrinth, which is the Ukraine today, but I will just say very simply, right, in a second simplicity, and this is a well-considered second simplicity, we need to stand with the Ukraine. I have not actually changed my position. I've done a little reading to kind of catch up in the last few days. I have not actually changed my position that I was articulating at the beginning of the Ukraine war in the first 4 weeks. And Elaine and I actually put a book out about it that I think is either already available or about to be available, right? I think it's already available, right? I think it's already available, right? On the first 4 weeks of the Ukraine war. And it's available now as an ebook. It's called Glory to the Heroes. And my core positions that I expressed there, right, and shared with Elena, and Elena's writing there, I stand by 1,000%. In other words, we need to stand with the Ukraine, right? We need to be arming the Ukraine in the best way we can, right? It's a tragic situation, right? Putin, right, is a tragedy in the structure of the Soviet Union today, right? Its moral structure in terms of its hierarchies of power, right, is a tragedy, right? And it's critical that the Ukraine, which is a very complex place, and it's not only filled with heroes, right? There are obviously fifth columns, and there's obviously, like in any place in the world, there's, some bad stuff happening in the Ukraine, just like there is all over the world. But the Ukraine is standing insanely heroically for value, and the Ukraine is standing for Western values. And it's a hard moment, right? There's this great fear of Putin's nuclear capacity. I don't think that's a misplaced fear, right? I think it needs to be taken seriously and responded to seriously, right? And, right, we need to support the Ukraine, to stand up with the Ukraine, right? To arm the Ukraine, right? And to stand for, right, a righteous conflict. And this is very, very, very important, right? There are still in the world wars that tragically need to be fought. There should be no more ground wars. There should be no more cybernetic wars, right? We should be at the end of war, but we're not. We're not there yet. And as long as there are wars, we need armies. When I sat with the Dalai Lama, right, in his home in Dharamsala, the Dalai Lama and I talked about the notion together, right, that there should be one world army. And he said it would be absurd to suggest that there should be no army at a time when the Putins of the world, right, have armies. Right? Of course, we need an army. And of course, we need to be able to respond to brutality, right, with force. Right? There's absolutely no choice about that. It needs to be done. I pray that we come to a time in the world where that won't be necessary, where we won't need any army, where we can, in fact, beat our swords into plowshares, in the words of the prophets. But that day has not yet come. And to actually adopt a position other than an activist position, right? To adopt a kind of pacifist position or a position of moral equivalence, right? To adopt a position of moral equivalence. And Becca, stay with me, love, right? To adopt a position of moral equivalence in this moment, right, is actually a mistake, okay? Right, and pacifism, right, I'm not going to go down this road. Pacifism, at least from my perspective and from the Dalai Lama's and quite a few others of us, pacifism is one of the worst forms of moral equivalence, right? Had we been pacifists during World War II, right, we'd have a world that was actually controlled by Nazism. And we need to say that, and we need to say that clearly, right, and unequivocally. And there's been all sorts of writings, which I pointed out at the beginning of the Ukraine war, that make subtle moral equivalences, right, between the Western position and between the Ukrainian position, between the Russian position, which are actually not the case. Now, I want to be clear again. And this is critically important. It's critically important, right? Of course, peace is a value, right? I mean, I've buried more students than anyone on this call, right, at 18 years old, right, who fought dying, right, for the preservation of peace. And my two sons are commandos, right, in a Western army, right, who, right, fight for peace and who risk their lives regularly, right? But the notion that we can actually just lay down our arms unilaterally, right, is absurd, right, and is a violation of she, right? It's a violation of the goddess, right? And that just needs to be said. Now, to be clear, I want to be clear about one thing. That doesn't mean that there are not ulterior agendas. That doesn't mean that the West has not engaged itself right, in moral violations that are significant, right? Just read David Graeber's book, Debt, right, to look at one of the great moral violations, right, of the West, right, in terms of how the World Bank has operated. The World Bank has done an enormous amount of good and an enormous amount of damage, right, on multiple levels, right? The entire system and structure of an exponential growth curve in which a very, very minuscule part of the world uses most of the world's resources is itself tragic. Right? That's a given, right? A world in which 1 billion people don't have drinking water, right, is tragic, right? 1000%, right? And I will not in any sense make a moral equivalence between Israel and Palestine. And I know the facts way too well, right? I actually lived, not in Holland, right, or in Germany. I actually lived, right, in Israel, right, with a beautiful Arab family that I was very close with. And I lived right next to Qalqilia, one of the 4 towns, right, in the West Bank, right? And there's not a moral equivalence, right, between the Israeli position and the Palestinian position. It's not true. Anyone who thinks there is simply doesn't know even one fact about what's going on, right? Israel has sued for peace again and again and again and again. Israel is a pluralistic Western democracy with full rights for, men and women, right, which has empowered, right, its citizenry in an incredible way. You can walk into Hadassah Hospital at the center of Jerusalem, and you can see Jewish and Arab doctors working side by side, saving and healing anyone. That's why the Hadassah Hospital, the center of Jerusalem, was nominated for a Nobel Prize. If you show me, right, any hospital, right, on the West Bank where I lived, right, any hospital, any place in the world, any hospital, any place in the world, right, or certainly any hospital, any place in the Arab world, where you have, right, Israeli and Arab doctors working side by side, saving, right, Israelis and Arabs in the exact same way, well, then I step back. But that's not the case. Everyone knows that the only place that that's possible, the only place, is in Jerusalem, right, under a Western democracy, which is called Israel. So to make moral equivalences, right, is a tragedy. And, right, to get your news and to evaluate what's happening, right, based on kind of superficial headlines, right, is also a tragedy. So, Israel's like a very, very good example of moral equivalence, right, which needs to be taken into account. And again, that does not mean that there's not corruption in Israel. And that does not mean that the Israeli army hasn't made mistakes. It has. But I've studied the Israeli army, right, very, very, very closely. If you've ever read the moral code of the Israeli army, written by Asa Kasher, and I would recommend everyone to read it, right? It's the most incredible moral code of any army in the world. And my children, right, have described to me their friends shot left and right because of the care that Israel takes in trying its best not to harm civilians, care that no other army that I'm aware of in the world, having researched this for 30 years, takes. So I'm going to be careful on moral equivalence, right? There is a need, tragically, in the world today to bear arms. We cannot actually unilaterally dismantle our armies, right? And the Ukraine is an example of a moral war with all of the complexities. So therefore, right, we have to actually engage and stand with the Ukrainians, right? And the Ukrainians have lost, right, so many, right, men and women and children in a war that they did not want, in a war that was forced upon them. And they're actually standing for value with all of the complexity at hand. So I just want to say that, in terms of, where my position has gone on this, it hasn't changed, right? I apologize for growing silent on it, right? I did grow silent on it. I was caught up in any number of other, right, existential risks, right? And we need, of course, to stay completely focused in every way we can, right, on the Ukraine and at the same time on the implications and of at least 10 other tragic spots in the world. And how we do that, right, is not simple. And that's the topic of today. That's what I want to talk about today. How do we actually do that? What does that mean? And I want to talk about that, this week and next week. And if I can frame the question is, who's included in my story? Okay, who's included in my story? That's the question. Okay, who's included in my story? Are the people included in my story, right, only those people are in my family, right? Or the people included in my story, those people are in my extended family, right? I go to war, right? Appropriately to war, meaning if someone breaks into my house and wants to kill my children, I go to save my children, right? For sure. Someone breaks into someone else's house, do I go to save those children? Well, no. Why? Because I'm not aware of it. But what if I am aware of it? What if I can act? So I want to actually, right? I want to actually ask David, right, to read the code. And I really want to go into the depth of this question, right? In other words, what does it mean to place our attention on suffering? What does it mean to be a human being, right? Which is, which is this noble and glorious and privileged experience, right? To be human in the world, to have the ability to live and feel and breathe in the world, and to know of suffering, right? And not to be able to engage all of the suffering, and to feel like we're forced to turn away. What does that mean? What is that experience? And when is it okay to turn away? And maybe it's never okay to turn away. Is it ever okay to turn away? So that's the question we're going to talk about, right? We're going to talk about right. And by the way, I'm going to say to Brad, whoever Brad is, Brad, I certainly love you, right? I'm going to say this very directly. And if you never come back again, it's totally fine, right? I'm completely honoring you, my friend. But actually, that is absurd, right? The notion that it's the same old racism and gradual genocide is not to understand what the word genocide means, right? Number one, right? A. B, right? That it's the same old racism is beyond absurd, right? And my boys are directly involved in it. Right, my daughter's directly involved in it. Right, I lived in Israel for 20 years. I lived on the West Bank. Right, I walked around unarmed. Right, was deep friends with some of the most wonderful, right, Arab families who are at the center, right, of the West Bank. You'd have to know a lot of information, Brad, to actually make that statement. And chat box, I've spent my life talking to both wonderful Jews and wonderful Arabs on both sides of the divide. It's an extremely complex issue. You need to actually understand how we got here, who the players are, right? And you got to be very, very careful before you say things in a chat box, right? Accusing Israel of gradual genocide. I'd be very careful, my friend, right? That is an unequivocally false statement, right? From beginning to end, right? And I say that, tenderly, fiercely, gently. Again, doesn't mean that Israel's always right. Doesn't mean Israel doesn't make mistakes. Doesn't mean the United States is always right. The United States makes, significant mistakes, right? But that Israel is a pluralistic Western democracy, right? That is animated at its core by pluralistic Western values. It is not the case of any of the 22 states that surround Israel, right? Several of which, right, are today committed still to its destruction, most of which have been committed to its destruction, right, for the last, several decades. And the ethos that guides the Israeli army and the ethos that guides, right, the surrounding armies is entirely different. So let's hold that there. And here we go. And we can't be afraid, right? And I just want to say, we can't be afraid, right, to make moral statements. Even when there's complexity, there are moral statements. And there are so many chat boxes in the world, right, where people kind of lightly will kind of accuse, Israel of genocide, the Ukraine of being, a kind of CIA outpost that we're kind of blithely defending, making moral equivalences between the Putin structured army and the Ukrainian army. It's just not true. Right? It's just not true. And we can't, right? We can't, right? Right. And as I said, right, very, very clearly, right, there are people on both sides. That's what I just said. I just said, I'm very close friends personally, not writing in a chat box, with some of the leading Arab families, some of the leading Jewish families. I lived for many, many years, right, in this region of the world, right? I know it better than I know almost anything else. Right, both directly, personally, both in terms of its history, both in terms of its players. So one of the things that the woke world does is that it just makes blithe statements and doesn't actually hold its speech responsibly. We've got to be very, very careful before we throw around words like genocide. We've got to know a lot of information. And my general policy, and I say this to my kids as well, whenever my kids want to take a position, I say to my kids, argue the other position. You want to take this position? Argue the other position, right? Argue it powerfully. Read all the opposing positions that completely disagree with what you're saying. Argue the opposing position well. And if you can do that well, then go back to your position, see if you still hold it. If you do, then hold it strongly. Right? I never have in my entire life ever read one side of an issue. I always read, very carefully and speak very carefully on both sides, right? And then come to kind of integrate, right, the largest integration we can make. But there is no way in one mountain, right, I'm ever going to be afraid to make a moral statement. And there's no way, and Dalai Lama, my dear friend, stands with me in this, as do many other people, that I'm ever going to, right, be afraid to say that pacifism, right, adopting a pacifist position, right, for example, right, in World War II or in the Ukraine moment, right, is a moral position. That is a violation of outrageous love, right? And outrageous love sometimes requires, it never requires and never allows you to demonize, right, to fully demonize, right? Even when you're obligated to go to war, we have to treat, right, the person that you have to go to war with, if it's a sad and tragic righteous war, and every war is tragic. There's no war that's not tragic. Wars are tragic, and we want peace to be the reigning value in the world. We have to do everything we can to end all war, right? And as long as we're still in a place where there's a moral obligation to make a war which is tragic, we have to do it with outrageous love, right? In other words, which means how we treat prisoners, right? How we treat men, women, and children, right? How we try and hold our relationship to civilian populations, right? Et cetera, right? So there's an enormous possibility, right? Even to be in a tragic war and to hold that tragic war, right? With dignity and with honor, right? And not to have it reduced to, right, a worse horror than war already is. And so all of this just needs to be said, right? All of this just needs to be said. Okay. So wow. Oh, that was a lot, right? That was a lot. We didn't even get started here, right? Right? We didn't even get started here, my friends. It was just saying hello. This was just the saying hello. And yes, Enoch, it is tears. It's completely tears, right? These are holy and broken hallelujahs, right? Which demand tears, right? Which demand tears. And I'm going to give you just one more image. It's a tragic image. When I came to Israel and worked with people in Kalkilia, right, to create right near a place called Kfar Saba, right, a little village called Tsufim. Right, what happened is it was tragic. It was tragic. What happened is anyone who would work with us, or several of the people who worked with us, right, had people in their family brutally hurt, right? And it happened, or killed. It happened, right, all over the West Bank, is that people actually worked in creating educational systems and nurseries and beautiful programs together, and creating this really intensely beautiful Jewish Arab, kind of gorgeousness, right? Actually had often their children shot in the stomach and left to die, right, by the extreme elements, right, of the West Bank population, who had been morally hijacked by Yasser Arafat's PLO. And I would go to the homes, right, of my close friends, my close Arab friends, whose children had been killed, right, for them helping to start a nursery. And we would sit and we would cry together, right? So yes, there are tears. Yes, there are tears, right? And oh my God, right? When the United States and Great Britain bombed Germany, right, at the end of World War II, it was a horror. The bombings were a horror, right? They were a horror, right? There is nothing other than tears and war. What does war mean? People killing each other, right? It's a horror from beginning to end. It's beyond tragic, right? And not to oppose the worst forms of tyranny. Nazism, for example, right, is an even greater tragedy than war. And when we go to war, what we're saying is we're standing not just for the present, we're standing for the future. When we go to war, when we tragically, horrifically have to go to war and may there be no more wars, what we're saying is that there's a covenant between the generations, right? And in this covenant between the generations, we're standing for the trillions of unborn people. And we're saying we're taking responsibility in this moment. This is the moment which we need to take responsibility. And that's deep. It's deep. It's deep. Had that not happened, right, in World War II, we'd live in a completely different world. So let's feel that and let's hear that, right? And it's a big deal. Okay, so let's step in. David, give us our code. And David, before you read that code, let me just suggest to everyone, not a book that's on the kind of right wing of Israel or the left wing. Take a look, and this is to who asked that question? I think Richard. This is for you, Richard. Right? Take a look, brother, at a bunch of books by Daniel Gordis, who's a colleague of mine in Israel. Daniel Gordis, right? And take a look at his books on Israel. Right? That's one very, very, very good way to start. Right? Right. And so take a look at that. That'll give you a very, very deep sense. He's a middle of the road Israeli position. They're extremely intelligent. They're, insanely well researched, right? And it's a deep history of Israel, of the conflict, and it's probably the best single introduction. He's written a couple of books on it, and they're well worth reading. And again, these are not these are kind of probably a very, very intelligent centrist position. And Danny is completely meticulous with facts. So if someone wants to read one book, that's what I'd recommend. Take it away, David.
Thank you. This week's evolutionary love code. It's a moral consideration here. If there were two children outside of your home and you saw them suffering on your front lawn, you would stop everything you're doing to help them. But if the same children are in another part of the world, even if you are aware of their existence and aware of the fact that they are suffering, all too often the overwhelming majority of human beings go on with business as usual. To be or not to be, that is the question. It's a question that every human being must ask in this moment of meta-crisis. What does it mean to be human? What's the nature of our joy as human beings? What's the nature of our tears as human beings? What are the actions required of us as human beings? What are the responsibilities required of us as human beings? What are the rights required of us as human beings? And what are the raptures required of us as human beings? We ask these questions not from a place of shame, not from a place of brokenness, but from a place of wholeness and celebration, from a place of agony, but also from a place of ecstasy. We stand together in the nobility of our humanity and in the ecstatic urgency of our humanity, and we invoke the possible human. And the possible human is omniconsiderate for the sake of the whole. The possible human feels as if the whole of humanity, the whole of reality, is visible to the naked eye in their front lawn, in the front yard. The possible human feels the truth that the whole includes not only every human being in the present, but also every human being in the past and in the future. The possible human stops business as usual and acts for the liberation of the whole. The possible human understands that to be is to be Homo Amor. I turn my word back to you, beloved Dr. Marc.
Beautiful, David. So thank you, David. We're definitely not going to be able to get into this code, so we're going to have to pick this up next week. But I wanted to spend another couple of minutes because this was an unexpected topic. I'm not quite sure how we got here, but clearly it was necessary. And I want to just also honor, right, the broken information ecology. So if I understood the information based on a reading of, the broken information ecology that we live in, then I would come to very complex conclusions and very different conclusions than what I've come to. It takes something to penetrate the surface of an information ecology to actually gather information. The way you have to do that is not reading the daily news. You can't get it from The Guardian. You're not going to get it from the New York Times. You're not going to get it from CNN. You're not going to get it from a particular echo bubble. You've got to read more deeply. So for example, Brad, who wrote a couple of things in the chat box earlier, I don't know Brad, but I'm sure he's a great person. And Brad, if you're here, I'm sure you're a great person. I'm sure he's kind, intelligent, wise in 1,000 ways. And I'm sure we'd have a great time having dinner, and maybe we'll get to one day. Okay. So I take that as a given. Right? I take the goodwill, right, and the beautiful heart of everyone here as a given. And, right, to actually be able to get to sufficient information actually takes something. So I'm just going to give you an example. I'm just going to give you an example about Israel, because that's where we were talking. Okay. Just going to give you one example. So Israel foils every day. Hold on to this for a second. Israel foils every day 3 to 4 terrorist incidents, which are aimed at civilians every single day. Anyone know that? That's actually the gig. So it's always love. Sabri, don't worry, love. Sabri, it's always love. But love is also fierce, right? Love's not just kind of a woke, it's all good, right? In other words, you just got to understand, right, that in order to gather information, you have to, in order to look at anything, you need to understand its context, what caused it to happen, what are the things that lay behind it, what's it going to cause in the future, what's the alternative to not doing it. And to do that, the way you gather information is, I would say, on any topic that you want to talk about in public, I would do at least 2 things. And this is just a process, a way to play. 1, read 2 books on opposing sides of the issue, right? Not the daily news, not the kind of get out of your own filter bubble, and read 2 books, right? Not, I don't have time. If you're going to talk about something publicly, and if you're going to form an actual opinion about something, you have to become Homo Amor. And Homo Amor has to be a warrior, and a warrior needs to be able to do sense making. And to do sense making is to become intimate with reality. So always read at least 2 books or 2 serious monographs that give you opposing sides of a position, and read them carefully, right? Start with 2. 2 is a good place to start, right? Start with 2 basic, right, positions, right? The opposite of the better is the best, right? Start with 2, right? And that's critically important. And if you can do that, you can begin to find your way. You can begin to gather information. And second suggestion is, don't have an opinion on everything, right? It's very hard to have an opinion on everything, right? There's lots of things going on in the world. Don't form your opinion by reading, surface sheens of news. Pick an area where you're going to engage, we're going to talk about, and we're going to be actually engaged in doing something about. You're going to engage in a serious way. And in that area, go deep. Okay? In that area, go deep. Actually learn, become a master in that area. Okay? Right? I'm very, very, very concerned, right, with the healthcare crisis in the United States. And there's a lot to say about it, but I don't quite feel, and I'm about to start talking about it at some point, I don't feel I've mastered it. It's a very, very complex issue, right? And the notion, right, the notions put forth in kind of most of the internet sides of this conversation actually don't take the facts into account. And how we can actually create the best healthcare in the United States, right, is a real issue, and we need to do something. It's a tragic situation. And I'm not going to speak about it publicly until I feel I've mastered it and I've synthesized the information and I can actually suggest, right, a way forward, right? And so that's always what we need to do, right? We always, right, you have to kind of pick where is your energy going to go? And I wouldn't spread it all over the place, right? I would actually be a little monogamous here, right? Or at least, polyamorous with a couple of issues, and pick an issue or two where you can actually become a master. Most people are completely lost, right? The information ecology is completely disturbing. There's massive propaganda campaigns which are waged on all sides, and how you find your way beneath propaganda to actually be able to do sense making is critical. And just to begin with, not the end, but to begin with, right? Pick one or two issues, not more, right? In other words, to be able to have the moral center, not to have to speak on everything, right? Pick one or two issues, and then I would actually read deeply on both sides, and then if possible, find and speak to people, because you can. You can find people through the web, you can talk directly, speak to people on both sides of the issue, meaning pour yourself in, right? And actually, or pick one issue, and then actually become somewhat of a master of it, and then add to the conversation, right, in a deep and a powerful way. Okay, that's part of what it means to be an outrageous lover. You can't be an outrageous lover, right, without doing sense making. And sense making means integrating, synergizing, opposing, deeply felt, intelligently, madly loving, articulated perspectives, synergizing them into a larger whole. It's not pro-life or pro-choice. Both sides are propagandizing, right? There's a larger synergistic whole. And by the way, when we're talking about, for example, Ukraine, right, in Russia, right, or we're talking about Israel, right, and right, the Israeli-Arab conflict, right, even though on both of those sides, right, there's a clear side that's actually standing for democracy and Western value, and a clear side that's not, that doesn't mean that the side that's standing for democracy and Western value is perfect or makes all the right policy decisions. So I'm going to just kind of give you guys an example. I'm going to make this kind of very real. So I almost got thrown out of the settlement, right, in which I was a rabbi, right, because there was a post that appeared in a paper that was very popular in the communities, right, that I was involved with, right, and the post was talking about Yossi Sarid, Y-O-S-S-I, Sarid, S-A-R-I-D, was a very, very popular left-wing politician, and it basically had a list of Arab terrorists, and because Yossi Sarid was expressing positions similar to those that Brad expressed here, right, although not as extreme, he wouldn't have used words like genocide, but Yossi Sarid spent his entire life opposing Israeli policy on the West Bank, right? And so they list these guys, this newspaper listed Yossi Sarid with a list of Arab terrorists who had committed terrorist acts. That was a morally heinous act. It was a horrible thing to do. And I wrote and spoke every place I could and said that the people who just listed Yossi Sarid and demonized him are actually themselves committing an act of terror. That's a violation of Eros. It's a violation of love. And it actually seeds the ground for political assassination. And that we actually have to disagree fiercely with Yossi Sarid, but actually love him dearly and love his integrity and love his honesty and love, right, the free-spirited, fierce debate in a pluralistic democracy. And it was an incredible moment. Yossi Sarid called me and we became friends, right? And soon afterwards, Yitzhak Rabin in Israel was assassinated, right, by someone who held their position so strongly and couldn't hear the other position and demonized, right, the other position, which is tragic beyond imagination. So that's one, right? So in other words, it's a big deal. Number two, I want to just I want to stay real close with this. Going to get really personal here for a second, okay? Who's up for getting just for another 2 minutes, just really personal? Let's get really crazy personal. I lived in Sufim, literally right next to Kelkilia, right? You weren't safe to walk around without a revolver and a machine gun, because Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, terror organization, which literally, shot people in the stomach, raped people, closed down educational institutions, is a complete horror. They actually destroyed, and the Arab population of the West Bank hated them, but they were imposed from without. And that's a long story on how that happened. So everyone obviously walked around armed, right? I walked around unarmed. And I made, friends with, some of the wonderful families, including those who didn't want us there. And I said, here's the deal, right? I'm walking around without a gun, right? Stupid thing to do, right? But that's what I'm doing. And I did, right? I did for 2 years, right? Many, 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 many times. I walked into places where you just didn't have the possibility, right? To walk around without a gun. And I just said, you know what? I'm going without a machine gun. You want to kill me? Kill me. But let's make peace. So I share Brad's sentiment for peace, right? And I love Brad for expressing it the way he did. And Brad, we're not picking on you here, brother. You're just an example in the chat box, my friend. So tender and kind, right? And sometimes there's a tragic necessity for war. I'm going to give you the third example, and with that, I'm going to finish. So in Israel, there are checkpoints. There are checkpoints in Israel. In other words, there's this huge population from the West Bank that travels into what's called in Israel's Green Line, right? In the political boundaries of Israel before the 1967 war. So a huge part of the West Bank works in kind of what's called Israel proper. If there weren't checkpoints, there would be buses of school children blowing up every single day. That's just true, right? That's just a simple fact true. And as if there weren't checkpoints to stop, right? Arabs coming from the West Bank, for a minuscule amount of them, but a minuscule amount is enough to blow up, school buses every single day. So there has to be checkpoints and there has to be searches. There's no choice. However, who's doing the checkpoints and the searches, and how are we doing them? So I made a suggestion, right, on Israeli television, right, that we actually shouldn't have, right, kind of these untrained rough units. We should have, units that are strong militarily, but that actually, before you search someone in front of your children, you bow, right? You say, I apologize, right? And you ask permission, right? You actually have, juice stands, set up in which you have someone else from the unit who serves juice to the children and honors them, right? That if we have to do searches, which we do have to do, because otherwise you will have school buses filled with children blowing up. If we have to do searches, let's figure out how we're going to do churches, okay? Right? How we're going to do searches. Let's do searches in ways that honor the people that we're forced to search, and don't demean them, in front of their children. Because imagine what it's like, right, to grow up every day, right, and to see your father searched, right, every single day. What does that do to you? And especially if he's searched in a way that's not honoring. So, for example, if we have to do searches at checkpoints in Israel, which we do, right, then let's do it in a way, right, which actually honors, right, which is dignified, right, which is reverent, which holds the tragedy, which holds the tears. Does everyone feel that? And so it's kind of like that. And so we have to find ways to honor each other, right, even when we're in impossible situations. So, okay, let's hold it here for a second, my friends. This is a big conversation, an unexpected conversation. We started with the Ukraine and honoring the Ukraine and honoring, right, the battle in the Ukraine. Right? And we kind of, the Israel example came up because it came up in the chat box and I responded to it. And so we spent some time on Israel and we talked about war and the complexity of war and the tragedy of it. And we held a real and sacred conversation here in One Mountain, which is what we should be doing, right? Which is what we should be doing. So just thank you, everyone.